Thank you very much, Dr. Abolo, for the presentation. Now we're going to open things up to the panel. And we've heard plenty from our five keynote speakers. What I want to do now is get the two additional panelists that we have involved, and to maybe comment a little bit on what they have heard, if they have anything to add. So either Elijah or Theophilus, do you guys have anything to add from what you've heard? Any comments, any questions you'd like to make, just to get you guys involved a little bit, since you are also part of this panel. So Theophilus, Elijah, either of you?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay, I think
Yep.
I'll just Elijah, please go first.
Okay. So for me, I really want to thank everyone for all their contributions, especially second to the last presenter. I think George Badejo, you really hit the nail on the head, explaining the senior manager certification regime and why it's very, very important, because these days we don't want people who are supposed to be tasked with the responsibility of ensuring soundness in the financial system take that responsibility for granted. People are supposed to be held personally accountable. And as a fallout of the approved persons regime, that was what the senior manager certification regime was out to replace from 2016. It's following the conduct failings exhibited during the financial crisis, with the aim of making certain individuals in the financial services industry more accountable and establishing a healthier culture. For me, that regulation from the UK is also similar to what we have in Nigeria, the CBN in 2018, as a result of some of these actions came up with the CBN administrative sanctions, where people charged with the responsibility of holding the compliance function had definite actions that they were supposed to do, and whenever they failed to carry out them, sanctions were released. So there were administrative sanctions, there were penalties for deposit money banks. You needed to appoint chief compliance officers, just like what the chief risk master said. People no longer have to hide under the shadow. If you are appointed, you need to have the requisite skills, experience, knowledge, and then you need to be held accountable. So accountability and integrity comes into play. Thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. Theophilus, anything to comment on the presentations? Any questions you'd like to add, etc.?
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. I think Elijah has done justice to that. What I would like to add, from the investment perspective, there's also the sponsored individual requirement for investment firms, depending on their firm. So that's the SEC aspect of things. Elijah touched on the CBN aspect, which pretty much regulates the payments and banking. And as someone who works in the crypto space, I understand that having competent persons leading or steering the affairs of the company is very important. With recent events that we're seeing, and I think the risk master mentioned the tone at the top. It was something I was going to add as well, because the general objective behind these provisions is to ensure that the board is competent enough to drive a culture of compliance in the organization. And where this is absent, just you're going to have grifters. It's going to spread across the different roles: product development from a fintech perspective, your first line, your second line. It's just, you don't get that full scope of compliance as regulators want it to be designed. And I think I would also like to mention that the general tone in relation to enforcement has also been a bit of a setback in achieving this objective. So, the text is there, but how well have the regulators enforced these texts in relation to the key players in the financial market? It's something that is really worth considering. So, that's all I have to add for now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Theophilus. I want this to be a discussion, so I'm going to open up the floor for anyone to comment on what other people said, or on what just Theophilus and Elijah said. So Kunle, Elena, George, Daniel, Dr. Abolo, anything you'd like to add, or just to continue the discussion. I have a set of questions that I can throw out there to you guys, but since we've had 5 presentations, I thought we can comment on each one of the presentations, or just kind of add your grain of salt to what has been said.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, thanks, Elijah. It's very, very clear. Another aspect I had, I mean, the Dr. Apollo, if I get it right, if I got it right, mentioned understanding the enterprise risk management framework. From an audit perspective, you cannot do justice if you don't understand the enterprise risk management framework. And that's one thing I was saying, that moving from the third line down to the first line and getting involved in understanding this framework. Another key aspect of what we say from a culture perspective, that is very, very key, is auditing risk culture. Where you don't audit risk culture, and where I was coming from, risk culture is very, very key, from being proactive, reactive, and passive. And at that point, when we started auditing risk culture, we presented to the board. The board don't take it lightly. You might have a good rating, satisfactory audit rating. However, your risk culture is reactive. Don't forget, the management of every department is a subset of the representation of the board. So if I'm saying that management of, let's say, asset management is reactive, I'm technically saying that the board is reactive. So it means things can go wrong. So when we started auditing that, the perspective, the attitude changes. And it was on anti-money laundering when we rated a department unsatisfactory. The board up to the CEO of that particular department got their bonus slashed. They were, their promotion was delayed. That's the tone. And thanks, Elijah and Chiflo. The tone at the top is very, very key. If these are not achieved, then there's no way we can achieve, raise financial crime. So thank you, guys. I just thought to mention this type from a risk culture auditing, understanding enterprise risk management framework, and audit getting involved from that enforcement. It will change a lot of things in cleaning up the financial crime in our financial system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuna. Anyone want to comment on that? Yeah, go ahead, Elena. Go ahead.
So I would, I really enjoyed listening to all the speakers, and I would like to agree with the points made on the use of predictive analytics systems and automation, because I think we need all three. We need people, processes, and systems. We need people and their culture fully buying into what they are doing. We need the right processes, which is the right thresholds, the right policies, the right controls. But we also do need the systems. With the amount of data growing exponentially, it's no longer feasible to do things via manual spreadsheets, via manual monitoring. So all these tools that exist out there, I think multiple speakers mentioned this. And I think that's probably why the results of the poll, so we had the poll early on the anti-money laundering controls, and I think there was split opinions, are the controls good or not so good? And perhaps we are either missing then, the people, the understanding, the processes, or the systems, or maybe a combination of the three. So I just want us to reflect collectively on that, because I think if around this room, we do believe ourselves that, we could do better in that space. I think that's one of the takeaways for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Yes, Dr. Abolo, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. The issue of board risk oversight, that is one area of focus. I just finished, addressing the board of mortgage banks in Nigeria a couple of minutes ago. You see, risk management is about the tone at the top. You see, you have the global financial crisis. Is it that we didn't have enterprise risk management in place? Is it that we did not have the things about corporate governance? We didn't have chief compliance officers and so on? It boils down to the board. We also have the Basel Accord. You have Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3. We're now talking about Basel 4. And if you look at these standards, they are very, very rigorous. I mean, if you're talking about Basel Accord, you're talking about analytics, you're talking about modeling. We have all of those things there. But it boils down to misbehavior of people, not having the right culture. And once the body language of the board is wrong, everything is wrong. And there's only a lot that a chief compliance or chief risk officer can do. I retired from a government bank in Nigeria the Nigerian Export-Import Bank. And some of us went through hell. went through hell having to even cope with the interference of politicians and so on. So this is a very, a whole lot of issue. The board has to be, I mean, someone is already singing in Nigeria, the NDIC new chairman is already singing that, you know, the whole place has been messed up and all of that. Then in Nigeria, for instance, we used to have over 100 banks. Today, we have 20-something banks struggling to exist and so on. It boils down to corporate governance. It boils down to the body language of the board. Once the body language of the board is wrong, it's wrong. You also knew what happened at the Securities and Exchange Commission under Rema, what's her name again, when she was summoned by the National Assembly, and they were demanding for monies and all of that, and she said these are all shenanigans and so on, and she stood her ground and decided to go to Nigeria. So what we are discussing here boils down to what happens at the top level. If it's a government bank, for instance, you're in big trouble because you really need to get yourself ready to fight corruption. You are not a risk manager when it comes to government institutions. They shouldn't be telling people that they are risk officers or chief risk officers in government banks. You should be calling them anti-corruption officers. So it's the body language, issues of culture, risk culture, and then decisioning, as it were, building risk into our decision processes, and also building risk into our performance management systems. That is not being done. You see, you have to build the issues of conduct. You should find a way of putting numbers, of putting KPIs on conduct, and build it into the performance management system so that everybody behaves well. And then, of course, finally, it is the issue of the board providing the oversight responsibility, and there are 8 elements that make up that risk oversight responsibility. Defining the appetite, what you can tolerate, and also creating the culture, cascading risk, issues of accountability and transparency. All of these are woven together. That is why we say that the issue of conduct risk must be an enterprise issue that must be built into the enterprise risk management framework. It cannot be treated, as a silo. It's not going to work that way. But behavioral issues, behavioral science has to come into it so that we can achieve, very sound results in the financial system. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to agree that absolutely the tone from the top is absolutely important, but let's not forget as well that tone from within. As compliance and financial crime professionals, it's our responsibility to educate the top. It's our responsibility to educate everyone, but particularly the board, and to start building a different image and challenge that image about compliance or financial crime is business blocker, right? We all had that wherever you walk in. So let's start being salespeople. I think it's when we talk about the multiple hats of compliance person and financial crime person, I think salesperson, marketing hats, we need to wear these hats to sell the regulations, to sell our ideas, so we can build that understanding from the top and then cascade that to the rest of the business. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Anyone else wants to comment? Otherwise, we'll take a quick break according to the agenda, and then I have some questions that have been rolling in that we'll handle in the next session. So, Chidera, if you have, I know you have a few videos you want to play, you want to show us, and also there are some interaction polls, and then we'll wrap up with the last Q&A and some closing remarks. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue the discussion because, we're kind of grooving here and we got questions. So happy to continue with the discussion instead. Oluso, should we continue with the discussion?
Yes, let's continue, please.
Okay, perfect. So basically, I'll just kind of merge the Q&A section to this section, and I'm going to throw out a few questions out there. Feel free to tackle them. I mean, we've been getting some questions from some of the participants. The first question we have here is on digital assets. and activity and the regulations on that in Nigeria. Basically, should digital assets be regulated? Why, and what are the benefits as compared to other countries? Any of you are digital asset experts or want to tackle that question? No? Silence?
Yes, okay.
Let me contribute first before Theophilus.
Okay.
Go for it, Elijah.
So yes, I think digital assets should be regulated, because without regulation, there's an abuse of the market. And there's been a lot of confusion with how people perceive what the digital assets has come to do because of anonymity in how it's been used. Without regulation, it would bring room for unhealthy competition and loss of confidence. People would lose their funds to fraudulent investment scams, get rich quick schemes, and then no one is held accountable. So even firms that are establishing digital assets, companies, they need to be regulated, because you can't just collect people's funds and not educate them, or have an office where people can reach out to, or insure these funds. A lot of people go through the pig butchering scams these days. It's because the digital asset space is still new, it's still evolving. However, the regulatory sector itself needs to ensure that there is a mixed match of the kind of innovation, allowing room for innovation and creativity, and then also understanding what digital assets has come to do. It's not here to disrupt traditional finance. Traditional finance will definitely still exist. The central banks have come up with central bank digital currencies, but they have not really gone ahead to understand what is the perception of the market. So the central bank digital currencies, are people willing to use them? Is it a sort of a form of exchange? And what is in it that makes people feel digital assets is more innovative or more interesting to go into when investing? I think Theophilus would add to that. Thank you.
Theophilus, go ahead, jump in.
Thank you, Elijah. I think you've covered it extensively. But what I would like to add is this: the current regulatory regime. I mean, where the regulators try to, it seems to me like regulators like being the proverbial ostrich burying their head in the sand and pretending that it's not here. If we take a restrictive approach to cryptocurrencies, other countries are already licensing them, and Nigerians, one way or the other, will still get some level of exposure to those products offered outside of Nigeria. I work in this space. I do a lot of KYT in crypto, and I see a lot of interactions with exchanges as far as Iran. And you wonder what are Nigerians doing here? Why are they transacting these kind of exchanges? So without proper regulatory approach where you bring this under the regulatory umbrella. For instance, a few days ago, we had a call with the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, and one of the major issues that I raised on the call was why they are currently not collecting suspicious activity reports from cryptocurrency companies, virtual asset service providers. It deprives them of a wealth of intelligence, really, when you look at it closely. So you see a lot of people try to perpetrate fraud on these platforms and move it out to fiat, and then you lost track of where the financial crime originated from. But if they collected suspicious activity reports from virtual asset firms, they get a wider range of intelligence that could help them, help them in investigating and prosecuting some of these offenses. So generally, I believe that there should be, there is already in some way, if you look at the Money Laundering Act that was passed recently, and also some sort of pseudo regulations that are not yet effective from the SEC that already covers virtual asset service providers. But really, there's a lot more to be done. And I think that it works best to serve general utilitarian purpose that virtual asset service providers are regulated. Thank you.
Thank you, Theophilus. Anyone else wants to jump in? George?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just to add to everything everyone has said, and just to give my own opinion or answer to that particular question, I think it should be regulated. And I think it's an ongoing debate across a different jurisdiction. And it's very much for one of the reasons we've also mentioned about SMCR. So it will, if it's regulated, there would be investors' protection. We've seen different losses across different cryptocurrency around the world. It brings about market integrity as well. And also anti-money laundering compliance. So those are one of the reasons why there's a need to ensure that they also play on an equal play field with everybody else for those firms that are running those kind of schemes. However, I think it's also important to strike a balance between regulation and innovation, just as the prior commenter mentioned. Overly burdensome, if you like, or restrictive regulations can stifle innovation and push businesses to operate in different jurisdictions, which would not be favorable at the end. You know, there's a reason why there is a huge interest, and I think it should be encouraged, but also regulated, but not hindered in terms of its growth. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Anyone else wants to chip in? Otherwise,
Yes.
I'll go ahead, Dr. Obolo.
Yes. I just want to say that there's a difference between can and should. That digital, assets and digital space should be regulated. Yes, it should be, but we're talking about can. Do they have the capacity to do that? Right now, even regulating physical assets is a huge problem. And now, so how do you now talk of central banks or regulators regulating digital space? They need to have the capacity. Do they have the technology? Because this is a technology-driven thing. We are now in it. So if we are talking about digital, we are talking about digitizing regulation as well. If you can't digitize, regulation, you are still using old subtext and and all of that. People go, they pass through your airports with billions of dollars. You can't see them. We are talking about digital. How do you regulate someone passing through the airport with 1 billion? You can't see it. He has a digital wallet. So even when you come up with regulation that you should not travel with over $10,000, that is theory. That is theory. We are talking about digital space. Now, so the point is, do we have artificial intelligence? Do we have machine learning to be able to do this regulation that we are talking about? So let's be very, very frank with ourselves. Even though the CBN 2022 regulation, touches on issues of regulating, digital stuff, but that is at the point of theory. But in terms of practice, we do not have, the capacity. Which people? Where are the people? You don't have the capacity. You don't have the technology. So we cannot talk at the realm of academics or theory to say that you want to regulate, digital space. So that's the point. So the body is willing, but the spirit is not there. We don't have the capacity. But let's continue to drive and push the agenda that, yes, so we need to regulate. Yes, we need to regulate it. But we need to also build the capacity. We need to have the right technology support to be able to deal with this issue. Thank you.
That makes perfect sense. Kunle, go ahead. Thank you.
So to me, just a quick one. And one key thing to let voice to what Dr. Obolo has said. We have to move through various stages. And I took a cue from the failure of the TX in the US, in the United States, the WebTX failure. When I did a quick write-up on my LinkedIn page then and said, look, it has to go through stages. The first stage is where are we? The regulators must first of all understand that industry. And one thing I said in my presentation, data analysis and data science, even in the fintech space, how do we monitor suspicious transaction? The knowledge really there. In my firm, I have to sit down with the tech team to then come up with the script that can use to monitor transaction as it occurs. Is it by doing manual checking? So the regulators must also have various roadmap, the development stage, whereby they equip themselves with understanding that industry from the technology perspective, from the trading perspective, and from the financial perspective, and from the risk management angle. It should be regulated. The key one, put in place adequate governance. FTX failure was because of inadequate governance. How come we don't have a financial statement? How come the financial reporting? How come the risk management were not there? So from the regulatory perspective, they must start and put these then structures in place, the structural framework. Once this framework are in place, then we can move step by step in regulating the digital asset. Like the Dr. Apollo said, you cannot track it because you can move 10 billion within and it's just as simple as this. How do you track it? I mean, maybe Theo will let in some voice there.
Thank you, Kunle. I know, Daniel, you want to chip in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dr. Apollo raised a very good question. Should we or can we? And that is absolutely spot on. But I think, I'm going to add to that question, is that do we have the option? Do we have the option? A digital asset is there, it's in the market, it's finding its way into the traditional banking. You have a lot of exchange digital asset liquidators out there, a lot of businesses that accept digital asset as a method of payment. So therefore, it's a matter of fact now. It is within the financial institution. It is within the financial services. It's finding its way to us, and therefore, without regulating it, even if there are challenges in regulating digital asset, I think we have no choice but to drive to get regulations on that area, because it is there. It's a matter of fact.
Thank you, Daniel. We have a few more minutes left. I have another question here, which I'm going to throw out there to kind of wrap things up. Basically, the question here, again submitted by one of the attendees, is the role of advisory consultant firms, is it doing little or more in supporting bad behavior over financial gains? I know that's it might be a loaded question, but anyone wants to comment on that? On the role of advisory consulting firms?
I can take it away, the role of consulting and advisory firm. Consulting and advisory technically focuses more on financial audits, or except where there are due diligence to be done. And really, there are no deep dive in understanding the culture of the organization. I can come from a financial perspective, and my financial statement might be clean now, but years down the line, because the culture are very, very poor, which might not be feasible from a consulting firm coming for a 2 weeks, a 2 months, might not be visible. So you can see them, because of proper understanding of that structure, they will not be able to project how the performance of the company will be, because the culture, the culture of the board, a wrong culture can throw the business into loss, and can liquidate that particular business over a period of time. So in terms of consulting firms, we have to do much more to ensure we understand the business we're regulating, we are auditing, or we are providing advice for. They will tell you it's an advice. You are not meant to take it, except it is regulatory audit in this case that it must be presented to the board. Others will say it's your choice, but really, businesses, in terms of consulting firm, they must do a lot to improve that particular environment.
Just way of little addition. Yes, consulting advisory. Consulting advisory, it's important, but we need to be very clear that it must be process driven. Any consulting advisory that we are bringing to the organization must be process driven, and that resonates when we look at the Basel Accord, for instance. You will see that if you look at Pillar 1 under Basel 2, Basel 3, under Pillar 1, you will find that what Basel is trying to do is that as you get along on the continuum, as you go higher in terms of the approaches, you find that Basel is saying that when you get more involved, then you are compensated. The amount of the capital charge gets reduced when you move from the lower level approach to computation of your capital charge. What they are arguing there is that the more the organization itself gets its hand, you need to dirty your hand. You cannot leave it to the consultant alone, But I'm also pushing that, yes, consulting advisory is very important, but we must make sure that if they are coming in, there must be a full engagement. There must be proper handshake so that we don't leave this whole thing to the advice, the consulting advisor. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you.